Okay. So yes, we're a little bit, something which we can be very proud of in Wales is we have the Future Generations Act. It's come from the Welsh Assembly, and it's this really, really important understanding that the decisions that we make now will impact on, you know, successive generations coming down the line. And again, a bit like that with the SDGs, we've got a sort of interlocking jigsaw puzzle of 7 areas of ambition for future generations. So again, with permaculture, I'm trying to harmonize and bring together ideas from other spheres. So we want a prosperous Wales. In other words, we need to meet our needs. We need to be able to make income and livelihood. But can we do that in a way in which it makes Wales both resilient and healthy? It's interesting. Resilience is defined as the ability to withstand external shocks. What kind of external shocks might we expect to experience? Climate change, extreme weather events, you know, I don't know, fire, famines, floods, pandemics. What things might make us more resilient? And surely a more interconnected community, a stronger local economy, and yes, a healthy population. We're much more resilient if we're looking after ourselves. We need an equal Wales. We need to challenge inequality always. And again, that's important that we're thinking about that, because that sits, again, very much within the SDGs about thinking about gender equality and social equality. So it seems that our concern for the future very much is a social justice issue. Personal health, environmental health, socially and inclusive society, a Wales of cohesive communities, a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language, and a globally responsible Wales. So it's again interesting to think about how those 7 things might sit together, and how we, as people active in environment, social justice, permaculture, we should be using these instruments which have been created by governments as leverage to say, remind everybody that every planning decision in Wales needs to be looked at through all 7 of these perspectives. And essentially all of these 7 in some ways reflect and resonate rather nicely with the Millennium or Sustainable Development Goals. So we're all in this, we're trying to again have a more holistic view, and it's very important that this work that has been done to establish these views, that we can reference it and use it and understand that we're trying to operate within this framework. And you know, say the way that the TV news and all of that works is they never give you the backstory, do they? They'd always just tell you that little detail of today. Well, this is the backstory. This is the wider picture. The SDGs, the future, the goals of the Future Generation Act. These are essential. Okay, now there's another set of goals that we have identified, and I'm going to give this as a bigger overarching pattern as well. This is something else that we need to comply with and to work with, and it's this. The Paris Climate Change Agreement. Whoops. Yeah, okay, hope you can see that okay. This diagram here is, these are our targets for survival. And this red line represents our global emissions in terms of climate change, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, in 2020, now this graph was, this agreement was from December 2015. So it was drafted and signed just over 4 years ago, coming up to 5 years ago, and it became active in 2020, right now. So we're at the beginning of this process, and we're supposed to have spent the last 3, 4, 5 years preparing ourselves for this journey. This is the journey that humanity has to take. Oh, look, I can make it bigger. That's better. Hopefully that works for you. And so the red line tracks our collective global emissions. This is what we're pumping out into the atmosphere that's causing this climate crisis to escalate. Currently, it sits at 40 gigatons per year, and a gigaton is 1 billion tons. So collectively, human activity is responsible for pumping 40 billion tons of climate change gases into the atmosphere, specifically of carbon dioxide, rather. And we must not let it go any higher than that. The targets of the agreement they make your hair stand on end. This is what our governments have agreed to, and they've been arguing about this since when did they first having the first conference of partners meetings back in the 90s. You might remember in 1992, the world had the Rio Earth Summit, in which the world came together to agree that we were on the wrong path of development, that we needed to change. Now, since that time, since 1992, we've emitted more greenhouse gases than we had done prior to that. So we have not really followed our objectives yet. We're going to have to, okay, bye for now, Lydia. I am recording this. Okay, so here's our journey over the next, 3 decades, 2030, 2040, 2050. This decade, we collectively, humanity, must halve emissions. Just 50% drop in 10 years. This is unprecedented. We've never achieved this before. The steepness of the curve is such that it kind of looks like collapse. It kind of looks like an economic contraction of monumental proportions. That's the airline industry gone. That's the coal industry gone. That's the really big, dirty, polluting things either contracting to a small part of what they were or completely disappearing. That's this decade. And that would bring us from 40 to 20 billion tons emissions per year. So is that enough? No, we've got to get to zero. We've actually got to get to net zero. This is an enormous challenge. So in the second decade of the Paris Agreement, from 2030 to 2040, we're supposed to halve emissions again, from 20 to 10. Okay, so the numbers are smaller. The first decade is 40 to 20. We've got to eradicate 20 gigatons of emissions. The second decade, it's only 10, but it will be twice as hard because we would have done all the easy stuff already. The things that are easy to remove will be what we do first. So this second decade will be tough. The third decade, the Paris Agreement admits this, is that we'll never get to zero because there are certain processes and things that we're too reliant on. But that if in that third decade we can get from 10 to 5 gigatons of emissions, then that's kind of our eventual target, is to get to this point of halving, getting us down to 5 gigatons emissions. Okay, if we can do that by 2050, is that enough? No, sadly not. There's 2 more things that need to happen. At every single IPCC, Conference of Partners, Climate Change Summit, when all the governments have come together with the scientists to talk about policy, every single one of those meetings, certain people have said, yes, but we can solve this problem with technology. Climate change isn't such a bad deal because we're clever, we're smart, we're humans, we're adaptive, we have technologies. We can remove some of that carbon using machines. Well, I can say, so that has been factored into the plan, and the target is, after 3 decades, we'll be able to remove those 5 gigatons that we couldn't eliminate. We'll be able to remove those using technology. Okay, that's interesting. That's a technology that does not exist yet, and that is a set of technologies that we don't know whether it will scale up. I mean, we just don't know anything. But if there's an area where innovation is required, it's there. That's got to be it. That's where we need to come up with some new solutions. So there's the first line, and this is the second line. This takes us to net zero, because we're emitting 5, but we're also removing 5 with this blue line. We don't know how to do it, but we're going to have to try. So the third line, this is the third element of the Paris Climate Agreement. It's this. Farming. It's about farming and land use. So this has a very big relationship to countries like Wales, to more rural countries, more rural areas. Currently, farming around the world is responsible for 5 billion tons of emissions. So of this 40, 5 directly comes from farming. And that's caused from using nitrates, too much methane from cows, plowing soils, burning diesel to pump water. All of those things are responsible for emissions. So within the agreement, this is what our politicians and leaders have agreed to, is that in these 3 decades, farming will transition from being a net emitter to being a net sequestrator. That farming, after 3 decades, will lock more carbon into the ground than it emits. And there's some good news to be said about all of this, and it's that, and I will enlarge on this later on in the course, is the one and only place to store carbon long term where it's safe is in the soil. And the soil could absorb 100 gigatons of carbon a year if we could work out methods of how to do that. So one of our overarching objectives, big picture objectives in permaculture, is to devise and implement strategies that will sink carbon into the soil. And it's not just about climate change. We have lots of other reasons for doing that. Carbon-rich soils are more fertile. Carbon-rich soils can catch and hold more water. When it rains, obviously that water needs to percolate into the soil to be able to nourish plants. And carbon-rich soils can accept more water. They're more open. They're more absorptive to water. So that's one of the reasons why they become more fertile. So if we can do carbon capture into soils, we don't need fertilizers. We can create fertility using natural processes. Here's the big picture. Again, you probably know all of this, but before the Industrial Revolution started, okay, I'm going to come, let me, how it is. I like to think about this a little bit, about the Industrial Revolution and how we got here. So there was a geezer, a bloke called Abraham Darby, and in 1709, 311 years ago, Abraham Darby created a new technology, and he did it in Telford in Shropshire. I come from Bridgnorth in Shropshire, so just down the river from there, on the Severn, and he created the very first blast furnace. And a blast furnace is a continuous process, so it's working 24 hours a day. You put coal, limestone, and iron ore in the top, and steel comes out the bottom, or iron comes out the bottom. And so they learn how to make steel as well. And so obviously Abraham Darby had no idea the impact that this was going to have, and if the whole global system adapted these technologies. So just pointing the finger at people and blaming, trying to externalize responsibility doesn't really help. But so this is why we call this chapter the no blame game. We did not know, they did not know the impacts that they were having when they started the Industrial Revolution 300 years ago. But we do now, and we can't pretend that we don't. So this is the big change. Is okay, we can celebrate the achievements of the past. Look, there's Iron Bridge. Actually, I think the local Extinction Rebellion group hung big banners off the Iron Bridge the other day to kind of say how, you know, we're moving from coal power to solar power. I like to say that. And I put this is a solar roof. I took this photo at the Centre for Alternative Technology. Solar cells integrate into glass, can become part of a roof. We have the technologies to make these changes. We actually do. But what we haven't quite figured out is how to implement them anything like fast enough. When Abraham Darby began his Industrial Revolution and people started copying those ideas, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 285 parts per million. 285 parts per million. It was about, by 1985, that had risen to 350 parts per million. And that was really a time when the first real sort of alarm bells were ringing about climate change. We could see the amount of carbon in the atmosphere climbing very rapidly. So that was about 1985. It crossed the threshold. And what we now know is at 350 parts per million. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is like a thermal blanket. The heat coming in, bouncing off the earth, gets trapped and held by the atmosphere. The more CO2 there is in the atmosphere, the more the planet holds the heat. So right now, ever since 1985, the energy from the sun has been arriving faster than it's leaving. So the planet has been warming significantly since then. The global warming reality will only end when we get back to 350 parts per million. We've actually got to run it back to 350, otherwise we carry on warming. Where are we now? 407, 410 parts per million. So we've increased it by over 30% from what it was. And the atmosphere has never had this much CO2 in it in the whole of human history. 10,000 years of humans, 10,000 years of agriculture and settled society, we've never been at this high. So, and we've done it very quickly. So the only thing that we can hold really as a positive is if we can reverse it very quickly, maybe the planet can survive. How quickly? Well, the Paris Agreement gives us 30 years. But actually, even when they published it, they admitted that if we achieve these targets, we only have a 1 out of 3 chance of surviving. It's still not enough. Well, we've got we have a 66% chance of surviving. This is what they said in 2015. We have a 66% chance of surviving if we can achieve, and by surviving I mean avoiding runaway climate change. If it gets into a feedback loop, it will just accelerate away and there'll be nothing we can do about it. That's when they talk about tipping points. That's where we're at. We're very close to that now. So that is like giving, Russian roulette. You've seen the Deer Hunter or whatever. You put one bullet in a 6-shooter and spin it and shoot it. That's only a 1 in 6 chance. So we are giving a loaded gun with 2 bullets in and giving that to the next generation and saying that's an acceptable risk. It's clearly not. That's why teenage depression and suicide is so vast. Greta Thunberg, bless her, has educated the whole of the youth of the planet about climate change. They now are understanding these issues better than the adults. We need to bring not only the whole Earth's perspective into our whole Earth view into our perspective, we need to bring this climate change reality into our perspective and understand that our primary long-term goal is to get us out of this situation as quickly as we can, to find ways in which we can engineer greater resilience, but also much carbon sequestration into soil. This is what we have to do. And in all honesty, this graph gives us 30 years. We're now being told by science we actually have only 20 years to achieve this. So we are now into a period of highly significant rapid change. And we can either embrace this and work with it, or it will envelop us. It'll be like a wave just literally crashing over our heads, sweeping us away with it in its path of destruction. So being in denial, I understand why people might want to go, I'm not listening, it's not happening, you know, save me from this. But that's not going to help us. We will not be prepared in any way until we really bring this on board into our perspective, into our life plans, and to what we're doing. I like this quote. I put lots of little quotes in the book. This is actually painted on the wall of a Spanish artist, very famous Spanish artist called Cesar Manrique. He was from Lanzarote, and he went back to Lanzarote and created beautiful artworks there. He said in 1987, I believe that we are witnessing an historic moment where the huge danger to the environment is so evident, we must conceive a new responsibility with respect to the future. A new responsibility to the with respect to the future. So that's permaculture. It's interesting. That's about the time Bill published the Designer's Manual, about the same time. So, and again, go back and think of your life timeline, the river of life, and think about where some of these ecological milestones were in your life. I was just graduating in 1985 at the point when growth became genuinely unsustainable at that point. And anyway, whatever. And it was interesting to think that also, as we cross these barriers and thresholds of sustainability, is that also humans began to respond. Bill had originally published about permaculture in the 70s, in the mid and late 70s, after several years of formulating the ideas. And then 10 years later, his big book came out based on the experience of working and using those ideas. Okay, I said we'd have another little break, but I've gone over a little bit. Is everybody okay? We just carry on for a bit more and then we'll stop for lunch. So yeah, I think that's something very, very important, that we need to know where we are in relation to this bigger picture. And again, we've created this book to really try and help people communicate these ideas to peers, to younger people, to everyone really, to understand that it has to be about education. Because we have to find a new way. We have to redefine who we are. We have to be very specific about our relationship to this living planet, to our local, and think of how our local environment relates to the bigger global picture. These are our primary concerns. If we can frame development through this idea of future generations, constantly think about what's going to be the downstream long-term implications of the decisions that we're making today. And those decisions have to fit within the sort of Paris climate goals. Otherwise, we're not being fair or honest. So permaculture is, if you like, is a set of strategies of how we do that, how we achieve those things. And we looked at the ethics and that. I want to just touch on this subject first as well, and I'll come back to this when we're in Principle 8, and I like to talk about permaculture and people a lot more. But this is a thing that lazy people say to forgive themselves for inaction. They say, well, there's just too many people. The problem of the planet is there's too many of us. And in some ways that could be said to be true, because our collective impact is destroying the planet. However, if you actually look at the data and you actually look at the facts, what you discover is 10% of the people on the planet are responsible for 50% of the emissions. So if we didn't have this rich 10%, we wouldn't have a problem. We'd already be halfway to our Paris Climate Agreement. So actually, if this rich 10% was to live like the lower percentages, then we'd already be at 2030. We'd already have halved our emissions. So it's not about there's too many people, it's the way that certain people are behaving. Sadly, that does kind of include us, but that also puts us in the driving seat. We can do something about this. We have to do something about it. And usually when people say there's too many people, they're usually loosely referring to majority world populations. They mean, oh, exploding populations in Uganda or in Indonesia or something. But the truth is, your average Ugandan emits about 1/1000th of the CO2 as the average American. So it's very hard to argue there's too many Ugandans. Another way of looking at it is one more unit of population for Uganda puts a stress on the natural resources of Uganda, because they eat all their own food. They grow and eat their own food. They don't import food at all. Whereas an extra unit of population in the UK is a stress, a demand on global resources, because we consume vast amounts of resources from all over the world. So it's not about having to cull off a large part of the population. In fact, if we lost 90% of the people in the world, we'd still only be at 2030 of our Paris Climate Agreement. Because if we lost the poorest 90% and just the rich percent, not 10% carry on, that's still completely unsustainable. So it's clear that this Western profligate, energy inefficient, energy hungry, resource hungry lifestyles, consuming global resources, that's what has to go. So if we can escape this top 10%, if we can construct a life for ourselves that fits in somewhere down here in terms of resource efficiency, then you're insulating yourself against the changes that are coming in the future. If you need high resource lifestyle, a lot of energy, a lot of inputs, you're going to find that increasingly hard to achieve as we move into the future. So by simplifying our lives proactively now, we're putting ourselves in a much better situation. So this to me makes a lot of sense. So I don't know. I'll say just a couple more things, but just it's because it's a big subject. I took this photo of all these young faces in a school in Uganda, and here's a very interesting difference between the majority world and the first world. This 49% of people consuming all these resources are largely in the first world. The average age, actually the median age in Uganda today is 15. So that means that half of all the people there are still at school age or younger, which means they haven't started families yet. They haven't got married yet. They haven't entered their fertile years yet. So that population is going to keep growing, and it's going to stay young for quite some time. In the UK, the average population in the UK is 47. That means half of the people are already beyond their child rearing years, and we're heading towards an increasingly aging population. Japan, the median age in Japan is 51. They have an enormous proportion of their population is over 60. And again, it's not very sustainable to have lots of older people with high resource requirements and no young people to support them. So there's such a difference of attitude between the UK and Uganda. When I'm in the UK, we're always talking about the past. We're looking back. We're talking about maintaining our Victorian legacy and our Victorian technologies of steam trains and you know, even roads and cars are relatively old ideas now. The car's been around for 120 years. We're still really caught up in the past. In Uganda, it's all about the future. They have, I think, the most important resource of all, which is youth. They have young people and they're educated. They can, most of them speak pretty good English. They can use the internet. They've had good quality education. They might live at quite a basic level. 70% of people in Uganda still live in mud huts and in villages, but they grow 90% of their own food locally and organically. That's resilient. If the global economy was to fall down, Uganda would have a much better chance of surviving than the UK, because we only produce 50% of our food and we need enormous amounts of diesel and other resources to do it. So we're still in this viewpoint where we think, oh, we're first world, we're somehow protected from these changes and our wealth will somehow protect us. When in fact, it's the opposite that is true. Our wealth is very fleeting and passing. The global economy could fold. We saw it happen in 2008. Possibly the same thing is happening again now. So I think Britain is one of the most vulnerable countries and communities and societies to the changes that are coming, because we rely so much on non-local resources and fossil fuels, and we're rapidly aging population that's becoming a bit xenophobic. If we don't want foreigners coming into our country, who the hell is going to look after us? You know, as we get older, who's going to be the next, you know, the drivers of the economy? So I think in many ways the Western countries are on their way out, and that the majority world nations are assuming their place, if you like, finding their power. And I take great hope from the possibility, again, go back to Uganda. They haven't built any motorways. They don't have fixed copper wire phone line systems. They don't have big centralized sewage systems. They don't have huge refuse collection enterprises moving trash around the country hundreds of miles. They don't have those things. And what would be great is if they could somehow leapfrog, go straight to 21st century technology. We're still caught up in the 19th century. We're still oil, 19th century, coal, 19th century, internal combustion engine, 19th century. Big ships moving stuff around the world, that goes back even further. In Uganda, there are people that are going straight to solar. The first time they've ever had electricity, and it's solar panel on their mud hut. The first time they ever have a phone or a computer, it's a modern smartphone. There's people in Uganda who've never had a bank account, and the first thing that they're doing is opening up a digital bank account, straight to digital, straight to 21st century, straight to diffused technologies, rather than these sort of big linear industrial technologies that we're reliant on. So possibly we're set just now to be overtaken, and we're so I don't know, married, if you like, to our previous ways of doing things, that's preventing us from seeing the possibilities. There's a lot of stuff that we need to let go of. All of this really, like commuting lots of miles to work. The idea that we need 3 or 4 foreign holidays a year just to feel happy. We need to constantly be buying new clothes and all of this stuff. We have to let go of all of those ideas, understand that none of that fits within this sustainability transition that we're all part of, and that we can find out a different kind of place within that world to find our way towards the future. That's what I think quite strongly. So and that's what I'm trying to sort of bring across throughout in this sort of permaculture sort of journey is see where you are in the bigger picture. Understand, see your place within this world and within this living biosphere, but also see your place within this demographic shift, this economic shift that's happening. And it's moving away from the first world and towards a majority world, a younger population that genuinely have new ideas and new perspectives that we can help and respond for, we work with. But yeah, So just going back to this graph, and I'm looking at this again, is the poorest 50% of the people of the planet responsible for only 10% of total lifestyle consumption emissions. 50% of the world population only responsible for 10% of the emissions. Well, those are our teachers. What we need to do is to use permaculture ideas and permaculture techniques to allow us, everyone, to live at this level of resource intensity, but at a higher standard. Because many of the people in the poorest section here don't have clean water, they don't have access to good healthcare, they don't have stable nutrition, stable jobs, all those things within the SDGs that we know that we're trying to work towards. So permaculture can really, really, really add and give quality of life to especially those living in that bottom 50% of the emissions table. So again, is within the international work within permaculture is we're very much trying to connect with pre-transition communities that are still living out a sustainable way, and then giving them organic techniques and different approaches so that they can transition to this, let's say, 21st century sort of permaculture type technologies. That's what I see the potentials of. What else can we look at? That takes us to the first principle. Okay, so let's go back, and I'll finish our just a bit before lunch to introduce you to these principal characters, and I'm going to really advise that you have a look at In Grave Danger of Falling Food as some point between now and tomorrow, which is this. It's 50 minutes, I think, documentary with Bill Mollison. Here's Bill. A few more definitions. I've showed you my definition. My ethics principles design tools is a very simple definition. Permaculture tends to get a bit wordy, so I'm always trying to condense it, make it more compact. Permaculture, this would be Bill speaking. Permaculture is a creative design process based on whole systems thinking. It uses ethics and design principles. It guides us to mimic the patterns and relationships we can find in nature. And it can be applied to all aspects of human habitation, from agriculture to ecological building, from appropriate technology to education and even economics. Permaculture incorporates all of these things. And what I didn't say, but within my life journey, was I trained as an economics teacher. And I worked in high school for 4 terms, and then I left and moved to Wales. One of the reasons was I realized that working within the system, I wasn't able to affect change anything like fast enough. But and also is economics is quite a dry, stodgy subject. I've now come whole circle, and I'm now realizing that economics is how we fix things. It's a very, very important tool for changing our way of thinking and making decisions. And I'll expand on that later, because I like to do a lecture about money and decision making and economic paradigms. So here's a quote from Bill, and I like this, and I think this is partly what inspired the Small and Slow Solutions book and the work around it. But he said there is one and only one solution, and we have almost no time to try it. We must turn all our resources to repairing the natural world and train all of our young people to help. Wow. All of our resources to help repair the natural world, to train all our young people to help. They want to. We need to give them this last chance to create forests, soils, clean waters, clean energies, secure communities, stable regions, and to know how to do it from hands-on experience. So this is the ambition of permaculture, is to show everybody how they can repair the natural world, and also to give us a set of tools to be able to communicate this so that we can empower the next generation to lead on this. I want to see I want to see leadership from children, leadership from young people. I want to see leadership from Africa. I want the unincluded voices, the ones that we haven't heard, to start being heard, because we're just dominated by this, you know, white, male, rich, affluent, educated view, which is what hasn't got us to where we need to go, because it's elitist. So permaculture is a design system for sustainability. And there's the wonderful Charles Mollison. I don't know why he was called Bill, but it's his nickname. And he worked with David Holmgren to create it. And David was one of his students. There's some nice videos of them talking about each other. David says, when we work with nature, instead of trying to impose our will, the solution is often found within the problem. So this is a really great starting point for permaculture, and something which we'd like to say a lot, but it takes a bit of thought to really understand it. We like to say the problem is the solution, that a solution and a problem and its solution are really just inverse of the same thing. So too many people, there's only too many people in the way we behave. We educate people to make them be part of the regeneration of the world, and we can't have enough people. The problem is the solution. You might see a big pile of cow manure and go, oh, that's horrible and unsanitary and flies and disease. But with knowledge, you can know that you can turn that problem into compost. You can turn that shit into a resource, into something useful and valuable. And we can do that through design, through knowledge, and through applying our knowledge strategically, we can solve problems. So so Bill's passed away. David's about 60 now, early 60s. He's still very active. He lives in South Australia, in New South Wales or somewhere, Victoria. And he's very active. He doesn't travel anymore, but he's very active at conferences via Zoom and Skype. And he's written, I think I've lost the one, but the Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. And more recently, this is quite a weighty tome. He's written a book called Retro Suburbia. And what he's kind of arguing in there and illustrating very beautifully and very practical manual is that we will not have the chance or the time or the resources or the money to rebuild the world to be sustainable. What we're going to have to do is retrofit the infrastructure that we've built to make that work. I'd love to build my own little one planet eco house. I'm sure that's fun. I'm sure some of you have the same ambition, but realistically, we're not going to all get a chance to do that. Not in the time frame that we have. We're not going to pull down the suburbs and the commuter areas and create something different. What we're going to have to do is to reimagine how we can change, how transform the infrastructure, the wrong, inappropriate infrastructures that we have built, and make them work for the transition process, and make them also work for long-term sort of sustainability objectives. So interesting thoughts. Bill was a great observer of the natural world. To say he was a forester, and he taught about ecology. So as we go into his work, you'll really get an insight of that. And again, if you watch In Grave Danger of Falling Food, Bill comes across really well on that. If you just search on YouTube, by the way, you'll find that video. It's in the Dropbox and things as well. But you just go onto YouTube, search for In Grave Danger of Falling Food, and you'll find it. And you kind of begin to get an insight of the way that Bill was thinking and working, and how we got to this place. So yeah, there we go. There's obviously our ethics. We'll put that into the book as well. So I'm going to just pause at that point. We've got about 20 minutes left of our advertised time. I've done a lot of talking. Shall we have a little go round? Do you want to? I'd love to hear some thoughts back. Anything that's been triggered in your mind by what we've seen and talked about this morning, or any questions that you might have. So you're very welcome to. I shall switch off and mute, and let's hear from you.
So what occurs to me and has occurred to me over the last few years is that possibly the basis of all our problems is the fact that people are just greedy and they want more than they need. And if we could change that, then lots would automatically follow. And I don't see us teaching our young people to do that. I see us doing the opposite, which I find soul destroying. And I don't know on a big scale how we even start to begin to teach youngsters that, you know, we don't need more than we don't have to keep collecting things all the time, and how not to be so needy and how to appreciate the more basic things in life. So I think that that's a huge challenge, and I don't really know how we go about that. Obviously, education is the answer to everything, I guess. But yeah, currently it's not happening, not in our schools and not in our homes, I don't think.
Yeah, thank you for that, Michelle. I mean, you're right. So that's what I'm saying. Within the ethics, it contains permaculture ethics contain the most radical idea of all, which is there's such a thing as enough. And our society, we really taught the opposite. Greed is good, and we chase after more and more shiny gizmos and so forth. I think, yeah, education, but also by example. And I think actually, I think there maybe is a thirst or an interest in more simple lives. It's still there too, but obviously, again, in the majority world, they're all looking at what we've got and wanting that, you know, and just, yeah, huge challenges there. Anyway, thank you, Michelle. I shall shut up.
I was really interested by your population comments, actually. I've never looked at it like that before. But that's a conversation I have quite a lot with a few people, is that there's too many people on the planet. So to be able to switch that around and say, actually, it is very much how we're living in comparison to the, what was it, the poorest 50%. It just seems like the solution is there, like you say, but how, and as Michelle says, how do you educate everyone to change that? Because you have to have that desire to not need all of these materialistic things in order to achieve that, and it's so ingrained in so many people. Yeah, it's like a real eye opener, but how does that, you know, get taught to the masses, really? So I don't really know how I can go forward with that, but yeah, it would be nice to just everyone to see that, really, and move on with it.
Absolutely, and I mean, obviously that's why we've put it in our teaching resource and stuff, and I'm still vainly hoping that we can, you know, get these ideas.
Yeah. There has to be that tipping point. I mean, we should have hit that tipping point already, and you know, it's almost like one step forward, 4 steps back a lot of the time when you see how governments try and tackle this. Yeah, it's the head honchos, isn't it? We need some younger people with good ideas to come forward, really.
I really believe that the solution is to empower the youth, is to actually challenge them, everybody under a certain age, 16, 17, to think about what's their small and slow solution, and to allow them to put that in motion, you know, and empower them to. Yeah. So if you start small, you only make small mistakes, and then that gives you the chance to learn.
Yeah.
We need 1,000, 1 million, 10 million, you know, strategies in play, and we'll find out which are the best ones. But
yeah.
Engaging with the youngsters has to be it, and with the majority world, and taking a bit of that power away from those aging white men, you know.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, Stephen. Oh. Well, the way I see it, and I've been doing a lot of research, is it's exactly the way the political system has wanted it to be. And they have no interest at all in any kind of sustainable, in anything real, you know. They control the education system, and the education system has gone down so badly in this country. They train people only to be workers, to be tax-paying people, and they've encouraged what we call greed is really what they've encouraged, a rat race. They've made a rat race. You can't blame people for not understanding, because Jeff Bezos and the owners of Amazon and Facebook, all they want is money. You know, they have made trillions out of this lockdown. You know, their wealth has doubled. And like you say, the small 10%, they've doubled their wealth in 6 months, you know. There's no giving back. There's no real education. They don't want that. They want to keep you where you are. They make up all these problems. They blame you for these problems. And you can see from your diagram, that 10% is where the change needs to happen, you know. And the only thing we can do is change ourselves. You can't change anybody else. But when you set up something yourself and you create, you know, you'll disconnect yourself from the grid and you can produce food and you can live without things. You set a really good example for other people to see how simple and how you don't rely and depend on the people. And the real problem is pollution, really. It's not CO2, it's pollution, and it's Bayer, and it's Monsanto, and it's mono agriculture, and it's chopping down trees. But they don't talk about that. They never want to talk about what they're really doing. They always want to try and divert that you're the problem, not them. You know, there are massive amounts of toxins are being produced. They cause cancer. There's no biodiversity. With monoculture, you've got one crop growing over thousands of acres, you know. You never find that in nature. When you look at nature, just walk through any woodland or any patch of grass, you'll see different flowers, different types of bushes around. You know, there's no such thing as a field of just daisies or a field of grass and nothing else. The more you look down, the more you'll see little creatures, little critters, you know, different birds, you know. So nature is naturally diverse, and that's how it sustains itself, you know. And different plants can handle different things, and they shade and they protect each other, you know. But the opposite is going on in the man-made world, and they've purposely not educated you. And the children today know nothing about life. They just don't know a thing. And where you can see something the opposite is you can look at the Aborigines who lived off the land for thousands and thousands of years. And you can look at the Kogi of Colombia. It's like one of the last tribes left in the world. There's only a couple left, you know, and they live without electric, without phones. They train their children properly, and they're living sustainably. That's true sustainability. You know, if anyone hasn't heard of the Kogi, go and watch there's a couple of movies about the Kogi. They've been living off the land for a long, long time in Colombia. So that's all I want to say at the moment.
I shall unmute. Yes, From the Heart of the World was the first documentary about the Kogi Indians, indigenous people in Colombia. I think it's on YouTube. I've definitely got a copy of it. It's really mind-expanding, actually. It's very, it's extraordinary. So, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, Sean, is a lot within permaculture is about absorbing and including traditional knowledge into our perspective, because there's traditional First Nation people who lived very, you know, still living in intact societies that aren't reliant on external resources, on oil and things from the outside. People who've lived in that reality for thousands of years and still have that cultural set, if you like, in place. They have so much to offer us. So again, I'm talking about this flip of actually really listening to traditional societies, to younger people, to majority world societies, is those really have to become our leaders. And I agree with you. Yeah, sorry.
Both movies are on YouTube, Stephen, because I watched them both about 2 weeks ago, and a friend put me onto the newer one, but they mention in it about the earlier one or in the comments. So I watched both of them. They're both interesting movies, you know, to really see how people have been living sustainably for a long, long time, and no one's ever heard of them. And the amount of people who watch these videos, it's a tiny amount. It's like, you know, a few hundred. It should be so much bigger because it's been 20 years since the two movies have been made, but they're not promoted.
We used to, I began teaching permaculture, hosting permaculture courses, I think, 96. 1996, that was the first time I saw From the Heart of the World. So yeah, it's been around for 24 years.
Yeah,
Very, very powerful story.
it's a good story. Yeah, fantastic.
They've managed to maintain a reverence for the natural world. And we talk about, in permaculture, we like to say nature's our teacher. All the lessons about sustainability are just there to be observed. And we'll expand on this tomorrow. Yeah, so we've got our work cut out for us, for sure. And I also agree is that the most powerful way to change the world is to change yourself. And to apply these ideas, firstly to your own, bring them into your own knowledge and perspective, then to begin to apply them on yourself, on your home, and necessarily out into your community. And again, this fits in with the world of, with this vision of small and slow solutions. Is it might feel trivial and small. You're doing this massive journey in yourself to make a small bit of progress. But actually, that multiplies together very, very quickly if you can inspire and you know, create momentum in that direction for the people around you, or even inspire people on the other side of the world.
It's true, yeah. And the problem with the Western education world is everyone wants everything today. You know, they don't understand the only kind of enduring change is slow change. You can't just change everything in 5 minutes. You can't get everything now. Nature works at its own pace. You can't speed up growth by much. You know, in Holland, they were using CO2. They spray it into their greenhouses and the plants grow quicker. But there's only a certain amount of speeding up you can do in production, you know.
Yeah, you can't hurry the seasons. You can optimize it if you like, but you can't hurry that process. You're absolutely right. And that's why, again, you know, the Paris Agreement is framed over quite a long timeline, because that's what it's going to take. And I think, again, permaculture gives us this possibility, is to be consistent over a long period of time. Because how else can we bring about change if we can't be consistent? We can't all get onto the, if you like, so we're pulling in the same direction or pushing in the same direction. And I think these ethics and principles give us that possibility of sort of harmonizing individual actions to create a total overall effect. That's what I put my faith in. And, you know, we'll never get to know maybe whether it works or not, whether we get there or not. But if it's a positive process that helps make sense to your life, then I can't think of anything better to do than to take part in this transition.
Well, so many people are trying to get off grid now. You know, every day you see on Facebook, more families want to be part of the community. They want to get out of the cities. They know it's hell, you know, and they know that with a lockdown, you can starve. You know, they can cut your water off. You're very limited to food. You know, they've realised how vulnerable they are living in cities. You know,
we've been atomized, haven't we? In cities, we don't know anyone. We're strangers in this landscape. We don't have a locality or connections with that. We've lost our extended families. We've thrown out religion and belief and all of those things. We've got nothing to hold on to other than we're defined by what we consume. And there's a great dissatisfaction in that. And if anything good possibly can come out, actually, I think a lot of good will come out of coronavirus. I think coronavirus represents evolution, and it represents the evolution that we need to take, which is we can't live in these big cities and football stadiums and Asda superstores and things, because they are high, you know, whatever, they're contaminated environments. But if we're shopping locally, you're interacting much more with the same people. There's much less possibility for transmission.
I mean, you don't know where any of that food comes from, you know. I mean, the horse meat scandal proved, you know, that they control too much, but the farmers make no money. and so they start doing devious things. Some of them, the BS, you know, the mad cow disease. All of these problems are created by this economy, this endless growth. We must grow. We must make more. We must do that. You know, and it's just madness. And it creates a lot of problems, you know.
It really does. I would argue not everybody's realised it, but we have come to the end of the age of growth. I think we've come to the end of capitalism, actually. I think that happened in 2009 when they bailed the banks out. They broke their own rules. Capitalism is supposed to be about winners and losers.
Rules are just for you, Steve, or just for the little people. You know, they're just for us with no big businesses. That's who they are, because the government now is breaking its own rules with international law. It doesn't follow any rules. It does what it wants, but you must follow their rules. You know, that's the way they behave all the time.
But, you know, you will come unstuck, because if you continually ignore reality, you ignore the fact that there is gravity and there is, you know, an atmosphere, and we change the atmosphere, then that has enormous ramifications and knock-on effects. And we're now experiencing those. They say they've broken all of their own rules about economy and resources. And in some way within that lies a massive opportunity for those who can see beyond it. And again, that's what we're trying to achieve through permaculture and these processes that we're engaged in.
It's a great opportunity, that's for sure.
Yeah. And as a final thought, is this transition process that we're in, these next 2 or 3 decades, outlined by the Paris Agreement, that's also our life, that's our youth, our lifespan, and it's important. Also, we recognise how important this is, and we're struggling for this big change. But it's important that we enjoy the process, and we need to be happy, even though we're experiencing pandemic and stresses and changes. We need to understand that change is inevitable. It's always happening. It was always going to happen. If you put pressure onto living systems like we are doing, then those living systems are going to change the way they behave, which is what's happening. So, okay, it's scary, but we're trying not to get too freaked out. We're trying to stay focused on what we can do, what we can achieve, and try and enjoy the journey. Hey, this is interesting. We can be creative. We can make new things happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's an Indian guru called Sadhguru, and he's running 2 very big projects at the moment, river for rallies and the tree planting project, you know, and he's got millions of them, schools and projects all over India where they're restoring the land by planting trees and holding the water and getting the rivers running again, which are all drying up. So he's doing a lot of work. He's got at least 4 million followers, and he's been doing. So there are people out there doing things, but you don't hear much about it unless you seek out this information. I don't know if you've heard of the guy, but he's got a lot, and there's 1 or 2 other people trying to get trees going, but it's hard to get any kind of motivation out of the money pot, you know. But on a smaller scale, you know, you can engage with the local communities and get people more interested. You know, once they understand it's their future, it's their children's future, you know. And at the moment, at this rate, this direction, there isn't a future for the children. That's why 20% you mentioned want to commit suicide. They see no future, you know, and that's all government driven, and that's an agenda they have.
We need to give hope to those people and show the possible ways forward, because that's how people will respond.
Yeah. And it's a great opportunity.
Any other closing thoughts from you, Lindsay or Michelle, just before we go to lunch? Nodding head. Okay, thank you. All right, well, thanks for that. We've made our little start. And I suggest if we get back together at 7 p.m, I'll check in with a few things. I'll maybe reference some videos and things that you can look at, and just sort of set up the next phase of the PDC. So thank you for your attention. Really, really nice to meet you guys, and we're on our way. And I'll see you at 7.
Thanks, Steve. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Cheers. See you soon.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Babette.